Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. How much do you really know about what's going on in Gaza? For example, why does it seem like nothing ever gets resolved over there? Whose land is it really? Did you know that Hamas is actually a Hebrew word that's in the Hebrew Bible? That means violence. There's a whole number of things that we don't know about what's going on there, and many people have very strong opinions about it. But what we're going to be talking about today is looking at this situation in a whole new light, in the light of something called the dragon's prophecy. And I'm very delighted to have on the program today highly acclaimed author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza. He's going to tell us all about this new film, his eighth film that he's made, and why he did it and why it's important. Welcome to the program, Dinesh. It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
So before we introduce him properly and get into the dragon's prophecy, we've got a framing aphorism, which honestly I've stolen today. It's from the Bible. It says, "The Lord has said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you." That's from the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And that's just one part of Scripture that is connected to the dragon's prophecy and what's talked about in this film. Now, before we get too far in earnest, I really must go back and introduce our guest a bit better. Dinesh is from Mumbai, India, and has came to the United States as an exchange student in the 1970s, and was a very, very successful student. In his 20s, he became a policy analyst in the Reagan White House. For 2 decades, he was a scholar in two prominent think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute and the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He has made several documentary films. The ones that I've seen about six of them, and they're all great. He's also written many books. He's been published everywhere on topics like politics, religion, culture, economics. Two of the books that I've read that I think are really worthwhile in this context are ones maybe that aren't talked about as much as your other ones, Dinesh, and that is God Forsaken, which kind of ties into the dragon's prophecy, and also What's So Great About Christianity, which to my mind is one of the best books that's been written on that topic. Anyway, welcome to the program. I wanted to start here, and that is obviously you've been published widely. You talk about a lot of things publicly, and you've produced a lot of incredible documentary films. What was it that drew you to this book by Jonathan Cain in this particular subject?
My wife and I went to Israel for the first time in 2022, and I was exposed to biblical archaeology. Now, you have all these remarkable figures in the Bible, famous, some of them infamous, Pontius Pilate and the high priest named Caiaphas in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament, figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, the prophets, and then earlier on, King David. So, for many, many centuries, thousands of years in some cases, these figures were only in the Bible. You had to take them on faith. If somebody
Right.
said, prove the existence of David or prove the existence of Isaiah, it would be hard to do. But in recent years and decades, out of the ground have come all these artifacts, coins and seals made of clay and stone inscriptions. And suddenly these biblical figures are like leapfrogging into the pages of history via the
Hmm.
pathway of archaeology. I found this very fascinating
Right.
because it affirms the historicity of the Bible. And then several months later, October 7th, which I recognized soon enough was a very epical event, not a normal sort of attack, not even a normal terrorist attack, but a kind of historical, maybe even a biblical event in some respects. Brings you face to face with a type of evil that we rarely see in the normal course of life. And
Hmm.
so I got the idea of doing the film, and then along comes this fellow, Jonathan Kahn, who offers a kind of wide angled and quite ingenious biblical lens to see all these events and see them in the light of things that have happened sometimes thousands of years ago. And so he likens, for instance, the battle between Israel and Hamas to battles between the ancient Israelites and their longtime enemy called the Philistines. I was like,
Yes.
I've never not just heard about this, but I've never seen a comparison sort of so thoroughly pursued
Hmm.
as this guy, Jonathan Kahn, does. So I like the idea of doing a film that has the past, which is the archaeology, the present, which is the war, and now, of course, the Trump peace plan, and also the future, a hint of biblical prophecy, which is itself a tantalizing topic. So, this film is a bit of a departure for me in terms of topic, but I like the way it tries to combine the political and the historical and the biblical in a new kind of way.
Yeah, it's a brilliant and jarring film. I really enjoyed it. I was bothered by it, honestly, because it just draws so many different threads, as you say, through together, and asks so many questions that really, especially as a Christian, you have to really struggle with it, to answer. Talking about your background, one of the people who's in your film, who's been on our program, is Eric Metaxas, and you interview him, and he talks about one of his books, "Is Atheism Dead?" Which uh, it gets into this topic of how he shows that, as you just said, there's more and more forensic proof for the stories that are in the Bible. But I thought that was an interesting. He was an interesting person to have in the film because he also wrote another book about his journey to Christianity, which sort of parallels your own. And I kind of want to go there if you don't mind, because I see the dragon's prophecy for you as an author and as a filmmaker, kind of as a progression, as maybe a fruition of your journey as a Christian and in your faith. You want to talk about that a little bit in the context of the books that you've written about Christianity?
Yeah, I have a very kind of maybe unusual sort of story, and that is that I was born in India. My ancestors converted to Catholicism, and this was the result of the Portuguese impact, Portuguese colonialism in the southern part of India called Goa. And this is how I ended up with the last name D'Souza. Not that I have Portuguese blood, but when my ancestors converted, they took a Christian name, which for them, which ended up being a Portuguese name. And so I was raised Catholic, but in a very nominal, I would call it a social Christianity. It wasn't until I came to America, went to Dartmouth, as an adult, began to think about these issues in a fresh way, that I embraced Christianity anew as a more mature person. And
Hmm.
then I got very involved between 2008 and 2012 in debating leading atheists, Christopher
Right.
Hitchens, Richard
Hmm.
Dawkins, many others, Daniel Dennett, Michael Shermer, and I wrote 3 books on Christian apologetics. This is why
Yeah.
the biblical archaeology surprised me all the more, because I was unfamiliar, at least with the extent of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I thought it'd be nice to talk to Eric about it and have Eric do the kind of synoptic or summary view of archaeology, and then go to the places that he referred to in our conversation, which is what a film is good at doing. A film is good at taking you there and showing it to you. And I do the same,
Hmm.
as you know, in the beginning of the film with October 7th. I don't want to
Yes.
be telling you about it. I want to put you on a motorcycle with a
Yeah.
GoPro on your head alongside Hamas and have you ride across the fences from Gaza into the kibbutzes of Israel. And that's why I think you said the film is a little harrowing, because
Yeah.
it puts you on the scene.
Yes, it is, and it's in a way, it's graphic visually in some ways, but also the way it ties things together. And the other thing that you talk about in your books, and I would say including the United States of Socialism, which is another great book, is you tend to talk about things on a high level in terms of good and evil, even socialism. And you do this in the 2 books that I mentioned, but also in this new film. This is really presented as a good versus evil struggle. In fact, the Jonathan he makes the case that the dragon that is in the Book of Revelation is the same character or entity as the serpent who's in the book introduced in the Book of Genesis, right?
Absolutely. The dragon is a symbol, is an image for the devil. The Book of Revelation actually explicitly says that. It says, and let me tell you his name, and it's Satan. So we
Uh,
know right away that that this is not interpretation. This is a literal reading of what
mhm.
the Book of Revelation says. The woman that the dragon is trying to destroy through a flood is Israel, and it's significant that the woman is pregnant because right there you see the obvious symbolism is the Messiah. So it's not just Israel under attack, but also the offspring of Israel, which is Jesus and Christianity. So the film makes the point that in the last days, one of the biblical signposts is a rising tide of hostility, not just against the Jews in Israel, but also against what Jonathan Cahn calls the spiritual Israelites, which is the Christians.
Right.
And I think empirically we can look around the world and see, look at the Christian persecution now in
Yeah.
Syria, in Sudan, in Nigeria. So these,
Canada.
well, well, what I mean is, even in the West,
Yes.
you have, again, a joint hostility toward Israel and the Jews on the one side,
Right.
and Christians and the principles of America and the West on the other. So
Hmm.
this is happening not just from the radical jihadis, but also from their allies on the cultural left in the West.
Hmm. One of the things that I found really interesting in the film and also in the book was you explained this idea of the Jews as the chosen people. And this is a really fascinating, it was explained in a really interesting way that I'd never heard before. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because this is something that a lot of people really, including myself, really misunderstood until I watched the film and read the book.
I myself have, through the years, puzzled about this notion of a chosen people, particularly chosen by God.
Right.
There's a little joke or verse from Hilaire Belloc that goes back now more than a century. It just goes, "How odd of God to choose the Jews." Just a little ditty right there, which kind of sums it up. It's like, why? And Jonathan Cahn makes, I think, a couple of very interesting observations. First of all, he says God doesn't choose the Jews in the normal sense that I'm looking at seven different types of ice cream and I choose, vanilla or I choose chocolate. He says that God, in a sense, brings forth the Jews
Yeah.
through the community of Abraham. Abraham himself comes out of Mesopotamia. He crosses over into the land of the Canaanites. He starts the whole thing, if you will, and he starts the
Yeah.
whole thing at the prompting of God. So Kant's point is God, in a sense, anoints this new people and gives them a mission. And the mission is actually quite striking. It is basically to be the vessel, the mechanism to bring God's message into the world. So not
Right.
only the message of creation and the message of the Exodus and the prophets, but also the Ten Commandments.
Hmm.
Ultimately, the Messiah. All of it is coming out of this a relatively small, gang of people called the Jews. And so that is what makes them unique, that they represent the mission of God.
Hmm.
John is very emphatic that he is not in any way proclaiming that the Jews are chosen on account of any signal or special virtue. Not at all. God could have chosen somebody else. It just so happened that the Messiah and God is also functioning through history. It had to be
Right.
some people at some place at some time, and it happened to be these people in this place at a certain period of history.
And there's a lot of historical proof for that theory as well. The other thing that was really fascinating, Dinesh, is this idea of in 1948, the nation of Israel being resurrected, and this dragon really using the ancient nemesis of the Hebrew people, the Philistines, also known as the Palestinians, to be the instrument of that destruction. This is another theme that really had escaped me, even though I've got a lifetime of study in history and the Bible. I'd never really seen or heard of this portrayed in that light. Would you mind explaining that a little bit? Because I know it's an important theme in the book and the film.
Yeah, there's a very powerful idea going on here, and I would actually begin with something that's not mentioned in the film, which is Milton's Paradise Lost.
Right.
Because in Paradise Lost, you recognize that when the rebel angels are flung out of heaven, as Milton says,
We shall
hurling
make a heaven of hell.
flaming
Yeah.
from the ethereal
Yeah.
sky down to bottomless perdition. It's great stuff. But
Yeah.
but the point here is that Satan is seething and he wants to overthrow God, but he also
Right.
recognizes, well, we just we've just got in the MMA ring together. I lost. I'm not going to be able to overthrow God and unseat him from his throne. So
Right.
Satan has to go to plan B. Well, what is plan B? Find the things that God cares about and ruin those.
Yeah.
And not only that, but since Satan is a derivative being, himself a created being of God, Satan has to imitate God and do the same
Mm.
things that God does, but kind of on the bad side.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the idea here is that if God is going to sort of bring back the Jews, resurrect them in Jonathan Cahn's phrase, Satan goes, aha, well, what if I do that too? What if I go find some of the ancient enemies of the Jews and I find a way in a new environment to resurrect them? And you will
Right.
recognize these new people, if you will, by their tactics. They will do the same things that the ancient Philistines did. They will do raids into Jewish lands. They will take hostages. They will strip them down. They will parade them to jubilant celebrations in a place called Gaza. Gaza's in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I think it is when you first hear Jonathan Cahn in the first 30 seconds, you're like, really? But as he piles on and on and on, you begin to see, there's not only is there something there, but like, how could I have missed it before?
Yeah.
I had the
Yeah.
same reaction as you did listening to him.
Mhm.
Like, you have excavated, my friend, an insight that has eluded the rest of us.
Yeah, in some ways, it's almost overwhelming. You've got to really hold on to your hat a little bit because of the connections, and it's not just in the Bible. The other thing that's really interesting about the book and also the film, it's something you tend to do very well, is to make the connections with history, political history. For example, the connections are drawn with Nazism and the well-known hatred of Jews and Nazism, and even into Mein Kampf, which is sadly having its centennial this year. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because there are streams outside of the Bible which actually tie into this dragon's prophecy, aren't there?
Yes, as Hitler was expanding the war and the war spread to the Middle East, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, this is a guy who had a meeting with Hitler. And essentially he said, bring the Holocaust to the Middle East. This is where the Jews are. This is where they started out. This is a logical place to continue your mission of like Jewish extermination. And Hitler was like, "Yes, in due time, we'll get to that." But he never got to that. And of course, what happened is that the war was lost from the German side. The Grand Mufti flees to Egypt, is acclaimed as a hero, and then he becomes the kind of founder of a sort of new ideology, which could be called Palestinianism. It's a
Right.
funny word to use because there had never really been a Palestinian state. There had never been before even a people. There were Arabs who lived in those lands, but they weren't Palestinians. They were Arabs, many of them coming from Jordan, Syria, the nearby countries. But Palestinianism was a sort of 20th century invention.
Hmm.
And the young man who carried that torch, who was a disciple of the Grand Mufti, was Yasser Arafat, who started the Palestine Liberation Organization. And so it turns out that there is, in fact, a line that stretches from Hitler to Hamas. This is
Hmm.
not conjecture. There is a historical thread that is drawn out in the film.
Hmm.
And, the thing about Jonathan Cahn is that he generally speaks to an audience that fully accepts the authority of the Bible. My
Yeah.
audience is mixed. I've got Christians, but I've
Hmm.
got Jews, I've got secular people, and I anticipated that some of them would go like, well, Dinesh, this is all really fascinating, but like, how do we know that the people and events of the Bible are real? And that's
Hmm.
the reason for what seems to be a detour into biblical archaeology really isn't. It is an attempt to fortify the biblical analysis of Jonathan Cahn. But then I realized that en passant or along the way, it happens to do a second thing, which is that politically it demonstrates the presence of the Jews in that ancient land going back 2, 3, almost 4,000 years, back to Moses and perhaps even back to Abraham. And all of this can now be demonstrated through the mechanism of science.
Hmm. Hmm. One of the other things that you do in the film is you really illustrate the horror of October 7th. And you talked about, riding around on the motorcycle with the GoPro, but it goes deeper than that. There's one part in the film which is actually hard to watch, and this is where the young man is on his phone and he's calling his parents and he's boasting about how many people he's killed, and talking about the Nazis to illustrate the depth of evil that was going on. The Nazis, and you point this out in the film, they really tried to cover up a lot of what they did. They didn't do a very good job, obviously, but even some of the worst ones who were at the Nuremberg trials were, they went to the gallows in denial. But the people of Hamas, the ones who were executing these brutalities, the depth of evil is really shocking because they're not only not hiding it, they're boasting about it. They have a belief that this cult of murder is somehow accomplishing something on behalf of their people. Do you want to talk about how and why you needed to perhaps display that horror in the film?
I think it's important in order to think about evil to show people, um, to bring them up close to it. And a
Mhm,
film is unique in its power to do that. If I were to tell you, "Hey, I wanna tell you what life was like for me growing up in India," I can tell you about it, but it's a whole different thing from me, let's say, showing you a video and saying, "There's me. That's me at 10 years old, and that's my mom, and that's what I ate for breakfast, and that's the vendor who came to sell us things outside our house." If I put you on the scene, you would have an experiential sense of it.
mm,
And I think not only to see the jubilation, sometimes people say, uh, the civilians in Gaza have nothing to do with any of this. Well, they don't. But on the other hand, they were, many of them, absolutely kind of orgiastic in their excitement once it happened. And you could
mhm.
see them stomping on bodies, having
Yeah.
a really good time of it.
Mhm,
And the other thing is, as we talked to one of the young mothers in a kibbutz, this is a woman named Lishai Miran, whose husband Omri was captured by Hamas. And she's describing things that happened to her. She says, "These monsters came in through the window. Our family, we ran into our safe room and hid, and I held my child near, close to me. I realized while I was talking to her that we had that exact footage. Again,
mhm.
courtesy of Hamas. Hamas filmed it and they live streamed it. So we had a Telegram channel where we were collecting this footage. And I was in the rare position as a documentary filmmaker. Normally, if you hear someone telling a story like that, you have to go get actors and recreate the scene so people can get a feeling for what that was like. But I didn't have to do that because I had the actual footage. So as
Mhm.
she's telling you, you're actually seeing the events as they occurred at the time.
Yeah, incredible. Dinesh, one of the things that I would say the threads that runs through your work, the work that I know of, whether it's 2,000 Mules or Police State or Hillary's America or any of the other films you've made, is you're a person who's in relentless pursuit of the truth. You're always trying to uncover the truth and tell stories to illustrate that truth, to bring it to light. When you look at this film, The Dragon's Prophecy, what would you say are the truth or key truths that you are trying to reveal through this film?
I'm trying to reveal that there is a world behind the world,
Mm,
and that there is a cosmic struggle between good and evil. It's actually between God and the devil. So it's not just an
yeah,
abstraction good against an abstraction evil. It is between good personified by the creator and embodiment of all good, which is God, and evil personified by the devil. Now, the idea is that God and the devil are having this cosmic battle which has been going on since the beginning of time, but this battle heats up at particular stages of history, particularly in the stage that can be generally called the last age of man. Now, I want us to be very cautious about this because you're talking about the domain of the prophetic, but there are some big biblical landmarks or signposts. And one of them is the return of the Jews to their ancestral homeland. That's predicted repeatedly in
right.
the Bible, and it came true in 1948. So that's a big one. Um, But the other one is the rising temperature of anti-Jewishness and also anti-Christianity, and we do see that. So the film doesn't take a decisive position on all that, but what it's trying to say in the end is that it's not about Israel, it's not even about the Jews. In the end, it is about this moral struggle that to some degree is going on inside of every one of us. And
Wow.
we don't have a choice about whether to choose sides. We have to choose. But we
Mm,
have a choice about which side to choose. And so the film tries to be very stark in putting
mhm,
that choice before you and saying that both in an individual sense, but also in a political sense, we have to decide if we want to be on God's side, if we want to be on the side of the dragon.
mhm. So this is a prophetic struggle. It is the struggle of history, but I don't get the sense, and correct me if this is wrong, I don't get the sense that you present a fatalistic picture of the struggle. Am I wrong in that? Do we? I mean, obviously, those of us who are Christians, we know how history ends. Is that how this struggle is going to end, or is there something that we can do as individuals, especially as Christians, that can perhaps influence the outcome?
Well, we live in a world of laws of nature, and we also live in a world of free choice. And so even when we use phrases like God does this or that through the Jews, he doesn't do it by canceling out the free choice of the Jews.
Right.
The Jews, nevertheless, do exercise free choice. This is, by the way, a topic that the rabbis have debated in the Talmud. You see these debates when it says in the Bible, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now, what does that
Right.
mean? Did God make Pharaoh drive the Jews or prevent the
Hmm.
Jews from leaving? What could it possibly mean to say that God did that? And this creates interesting conundrums that are beyond the scope of the movie.
Right.
But what the film suggests is that our most important decision is to align ourselves with the forces of good and to take the steps necessary to live that kind of life, to put on that kind of spiritual armor. Now, maybe for the Jews, in some cases, like after October 7th, it involved putting on actual armor like the ancient Israelites did when they went out to do battle with the Philistines. But for the Christians, a lot of it has to do with resisting evil in our own lives and also to the degree we can in the world.
Hmm. Many of your films have been polarizing in terms of how they've been received, and perhaps that's by design because obviously you're trying to get people thinking about things seriously. The film's been out about a month now. What has the response been like so far to the Dragon's Prophecy?
It's the reviews have been just overwhelmingly good. Uh, I've had the very unusual experience. Normally, with earlier films, even in a very good review, I would have, well, but this could have been done better, or Dinesh is off the mark on that. In the reviews of this film, you can see for yourself, there's very little of that. It's
Yeah.
normally a um, a simply a declaration that the film really makes you think, and it
Yeah.
makes, as you said, connections between things that have happened, in some cases, thousands of years ago,
Hmm.
and it connects them to things that happen now, and then in very tantalizing ways, it points to what might be coming next. So, for
Yeah.
example, we're in the throes of the Trump sort of Gaza plan, and
Yeah.
I'm on board. I mean, I'm obviously happy the hostages are home. In fact, Lisha Miran has her husband back. He's reunited with their two little kids. I mean, who can be against that, right?
Hallelujah. Hmm.
But again, if you believe the Bible gives you the idea that, you know what? The issues over there are not going to be settled in an ultimate sense until the very end of time. And certainly for all my lifetime, this has been like the unsolved problem, despite, by the way, many
Yeah.
attempts, Jimmy, the Carter plan, the Reagan plan, the
Hmm.
Clinton plan. So lots of people have tried to solve it. And I think, that it's not to say you can't make headway. It's not to say you cannot create zones of stability even in the middle of a tempest.
Hmm.
But I agree with the Bible that I'm doubtful, and looking at Hamas, looking at its underlying ideology, looking at the global jihadi movement that has its eyes not just on Gaza or even the West Bank, but on Australia and Canada and Europe and the United States. I mean,
Hmm.
all of this is going to go on and not going to be solved anytime soon.
Hmm. You're definitely one of the leading voices in America in the conservative movement, if you will. The whole issue of Gaza has been one that has split the right, as it were. For example, you see, for example, I was watching or listening to a piece by Andrew Klavan talking about Tucker Carlson. A lot of people don't agree with what someone like Candace Owens is saying about this. Are you shocked by what some people whom you probably have known a long time and know very well on the quote unquote conservative right are saying about Gaza, or is this something that you expect it to come out at this time when everybody's talking about it?
I can't say that I expected it, but I think I do have, at least now, a little better understanding of the young people who are responding to it.
Right.
Because a lot of these young people are the products, first of all, of the COVID era, in
Hmm.
which they felt very dislocated. Their lives and their educations were rudely interrupted. Some of them are in very broken, dysfunctional family structures. They don't see the same kind of American dream that an earlier generation saw. My generation, for example, the Reagan generation. They also have been lied to by a lot of people. They've been lied to by some of their professors who have tried to propagandize them. And they've been lied to by the COVID authorities.
Hmm.
They've been lied to by the FBI and some of the what in America we call the police state. And so
Hmm.
what's happened is that when you now have a Tucker Carlson, a Candace Owens who come to these young people and say, well, guess what? You have all this manipulation, you have all these people lying to you, but there is a master group that is manipulating them. The
Yeah.
kind of manipulator of the manipulators, the puppeteer of the puppeteers. And this is the Jews. These young people, some of them at least, think this is a blazing insight, the kind of
Yeah.
the ultimate key. And so I can understand how they are falling for it, and so I'm sympathetic to this younger generation, but less sympathetic to the Pied Pipers who are leading them down what I think is this very bad road.
Why do you think they're doing that? Because of course, you've written extensively about Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan, in many speeches, and talked publicly about good versus evil struggle, and talked about, for example, the struggle between the Soviets and America as a good versus evil, and perhaps you could look at that in the context of the Dragon's prophecy. You could even talk about someone else you've written about a lot, Barack Obama, who said no religion is responsible for terrorism. People are responsible for violence and terrorism. Well, based upon what we're seeing, that's obviously not true. But are you? Why do you think that some of the leading commentators in the U.S. and elsewhere are saying this about Jews and seem to be stoking anti-Semitism? Is this part of the dragon's prophecy?
Well, the dragon's prophecy says something about this that is, I think, in some ways quite original because I've now appeared on a bunch of podcasts out of Israel, and some of them are secular podcasts with secular Jews, and I ask them, I go, "What's your explanation for anti-Semitism?" And I realize that they don't have one. By which I mean, they're really baffled. They're like, "Why do so many people hate us? And why has this been a persistent issue through history?" Now, this is not to say that anti Semitism doesn't have any secular or rational root. It does.
Right.
I think that rational root, to be honest, is in human envy. Whenever you have successful groups, and we're seeing that, in the United States toward other groups, there's some
Yeah.
hostility right now toward Asian Indians.
Yeah.
And it's not accidental that if you make a list of ethnic groups in America, the number one most successful group in terms of earnings right now in the United States, Asian Indians. So, hey, as not an accident, as the Marxists like to say.
Well, you're working your butt off, Dinesh. I mean, let's face it.
Well, but it doesn't matter because
Right,
what happens is when people develop this envy, they're never explicit about this. They'll never
right.
say, "Hey, the Jews are more hardworking. They save more. They emphasize entrepreneurship. They emphasize education. They go into
Yeah,
fields where you can make a lot of money." They don't say those things. They say, "Well, the Jews are they're shifty. They'll resort to tactics that we honest people would never do. Their success is entirely because they're so underhanded in their dealings with people." So that's
right.
really what's going on. I would call that's the secular explanation. But I think that even if you've made it, you still feel like it doesn't give you the full explanation. And
Mhm,
so the theological explanation, I think, doesn't replace the secular one, but it adds to it. And the theological explanation is that the devil will always target the Jews because that's his best way to get back at God. That's the way to
mm,
give him the last laugh on God. And that when you add this sort of theological element, you now get a fuller explanation of anti Semitism in those terms. And I find
mhm.
that when I mention this to Jews in Israel, they're very intrigued by this because they know that the rational explanation can only go so far.
Mm. I'm interested in, you mentioned speaking with Jews in Israel. What do they make of the anti-Semitism that's going on in places like the United States and Canada, where, for example, we have students who are pro-Palestine and who are preventing Jewish students from getting onto campus? What do they make of all this, and sort of the strange alliance between the left and Palestine, pro-Palestine? What do the Jews in Israel make of all that?
This is in some ways the big issue, I think, of our time. The Jews in Israel, I think, are quite dismayed and horrified. Let's remember in the United States, when I came to this country in 1978 as a teenager, both parties were pro Israel. So over time,
Mm,
almost without a fight, the Democratic Party started, in a sense, succumbing to the anti Israel elements who have taken over
right.
the party. Um,
Mm,
and on the Republican side, that's also underway, but not without a fight. And so there's major pushback against a Tucker Carlson. I just saw a survey that said that 25% of Trump voters, and these are probably all former Tucker fans, consider him now to be an anti-Semite and basically the leader of the Hitler Youth. I mean, this
yeah.
is a fairly large segment, and so Tucker is becoming just, I think, toxic,
Mhm.
radioactive. For you're not going to see a 2028 presidential candidate, putting his arm around him. It's not going to happen. But I think also for the Jews in Israel, the red green alliance, we saw it before. We saw it, in fact, right around the time I came to America in the Iranian Revolution. If you remember, the Iranian Revolution to overthrow the Shah was what the Shah himself called the Black Green Alliance. But by the black, he
Right.
meant the communists. And
Mhm.
by the green, he meant radical Islam, Khomeini. And
Mhm.
what happened was that they successfully forced him to abdicate, and then basically the green slaughtered the black. And
Right.
that's how we got the reign of the mullahs.
Mhm.
So this is a preview. Who knew that that would be seen and would come back in an enlarged way in all the
Mhm.
countries that you and I and others now inhabit? It's become more of a global phenomenon, but we saw a preview of it as early as the late 1970s.
Yeah, and those colors you talk about, even those are sort of drawn into this, dragon's prophecy, aren't they? That was, very, very striking, almost imperceptible. A lot of these things that, are talked about in the book and that you mentioned in the film, it's amazing how, and you just did a masterful job of this, bringing all of these different sort of threads together, and it's really hard to look at and just say, "Oh, no, no, that can't be." Uh, did you find that as you were making the film that it was becoming more and more persuasive, or did you have a plan at the outset that you were gonna try to make a case here?
We don't do these documentaries with a pre-existing script.
Okay.
We go out and have interesting conversations. But usually there has to be a central driving idea. That's what's going to make the film particularly novel or interesting or important. I have to say that with this film, I felt that there was a little bit of a providential guiding hand. And what I mean is, you always want to make a film that's timely. Normally, when you make a film, you go, this is a pretty timely film, but it's still 3 or 4 months from being in the theater and coming out. I can only hope it is almost as timely when it comes out. In this
Yeah.
case, we make a timely film, and the film is much more timely when it comes out, because even though some of these reverberations around Tucker and the critique coming from the right were simmering when we were making the film, they didn't go into full-blown like political warfare. But the film has come out at a time when these issues are front and center, and they haven't gone away. So
Hmm.
that the film is timely on the one hand, and yet some of its themes, I think, are truly timeless.
And that's in a way that kind of captures the idea of the dragon's prophecy. Folks, we've been talking with with acclaimed filmmaker and author Dinesh D'Souza about a new film that he has out called The Dragon's Prophecy. It's based upon the international bestseller The Dragon's Prophecy, and this film provides a secret key to unlock the problem and the solution. Khan reveals that October 7th and today's conflicts in the Middle East are an eerie revival of ancient battles described in the early books of the Bible, suggesting that we may be living in the end times of humanity itself. I've watched the film myself now twice. I bought it and also read the book, and highly recommend this. I can tell you it's going to shock you. It's going to trouble you. Some of parts of it are hard to watch, but like all of Dinesh's films, it'll challenge your preconceived ideas about what's going on in Gaza. Now, the film can be found at thedragonsprophecy.com. Where else can people find this film if they want to stream it or buy it, Dinesh?
Yeah, so the website is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. Don't forget the
Great.
film part of it. The
Thanks.
Dragons, plural, prophecyfilm.com. It's streaming on a bunch of platforms. They're all listed on the website. You can get the film right off of Amazon. It's the #1 DVD on Amazon. But you can also buy DVDs on the film website. And eventually, the film will be on Apple iTunes, Amazon Prime. There'll be other ways to watch the film as well. But right now, stream it or buy DVDs at thedragonsprophecyfilm.com.
Wonderful. And the book you can also find is available on Amazon, and I believe you can also order it. Can you order it off that website as well, Dinesh?
I not sure, but probably.
Okay. The
And
book
if
wasn't
not,
hard to find. Yeah.
it was a massive bestseller. It's easy to
Oh
find,
yeah.
Noble,
Yeah.
Amazon, either way.
Yeah.
A wonderful book, by the way. I highly recommend it,
Hmm.
and very timely. Khan has a unique gift in the way that he does what he does, and so he's a very. The film isn't. And the film goes beyond some of the themes that are in the book, but it benefits greatly from having his insights in the film.
And he's a very compelling person when you sit down with him too, isn't he? That those exchanges are some of the best parts of the film when you sit down with people like him and Eric Metaxas and others, and Benjamin Netanyahu. We shouldn't forget his contribution to the film. I also want to mention, because I'm a great fan of his work, Dinesh's other books. These can be found almost everywhere. I bought mine, I think, on Amazon, but two that I would really recommend, because I think they're just wonderful books for those of you who are Christians or who are thinking about or asking questions about Christianity. One is called God Forsaken, Bad Things Happen. Is there a God who cares? Yes, here's proof. Wonderful book. And also, What's So Great About Christianity? Has It looks at a lot of questions people ask about Christianity, but also with kind of a wry sense of humor that Dinesh has and that he's put on display during this interview. Dinesh, where else can people find your work, your many films and books? Where can we point people to so
Follow
they
me
can
on
find your
social
work?
media. On X, I'm at Dinesh D'Souza. I also do a daily podcast, the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. It's an audio on Apple and Spotify, and it's in video on YouTube and Rumble. So you can find it wherever podcasts are found, and then do check out the film.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Dinesh. It's been my great pleasure to finally meet you. I've enjoying your books and films for many years. Thanks for taking this time. God bless you and all of the work that you're doing. And I hope you have just wonderful success with this new film, The Dragon's Prophecy.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.